Holy Thursday, the institution of the Most Blessed Sacrament. At the command of the Lord, the master of the feast again set out the table, which he raised a little higher. It was placed in the middle of the room and covered with a cloth, over which two others were spread, one red, and the other white and transparent. Then the master set 2 jugs, one of water, the other of wine, onto the table. Peter and John now brought from the back part of the hall, where was the paschal hearth, the chalice they had brought from Veronica's house. They carried it between them in its case, holding it on their hands, and it looked as if they were carrying a tabernacle. They placed the case on the table before Jesus. The plate with the reaped paschal loaves, thin and whitish, stood near under a cover, and the other half of the loaf that had been cut at the paschal supper was also on the table. There was a wine and water vessel, also 3 boxes, one with thick oil, another with liquid oil, and a third empty. A spatula, or flat knife, lay near. The breaking and distributing of bread and drinking out of the same cup were customary in olden times at feasts of welcome and farewell. They were used as signs of brotherly love and friendship. I think there must be something about it in the Scriptures. Today Jesus elevated this custom to the dignity of the Most Holy Sacrament, for until now it was only a typical ceremony. One of the charges brought before Caiaphas on the occasion of Judas' treason was that Jesus had introduced something new into the paschal ceremonies, but Nicodemus proved from Scripture that this was an ancient practice at farewell feasts. Jesus' place was between Peter and John. The doors were closed, for everything was conducted with secrecy and solemnity. When the cover of the chalice had been removed and taken back to the recess in the rear of the coenaculum, Jesus prayed and uttered some very solemn words. I saw that he was explaining the Last Supper to the apostles, as also the ceremonies that were to accompany it. It reminded me of a priest teaching others the Holy Mass. Jesus then drew from the flat board upon which the vessels stood a kind of shelf, took the white linen that was hanging over the chalice, and spread it on the shelf. I saw him next take a round, flat plate from the chalice and place it on the covered shelf. Then taking the loaves from the covered plate nearby, he laid them on the one before him. The loaves were 4-cornered and oblong, in length sufficient to extend beyond the edge of the plate, though narrow enough to allow it to be seen at the sides. Then he drew the chalice somewhat nearer to himself, took from it the little cup that it contained, and set to the right and left the 6 smaller vessels that stood around it. He next blessed the Passover loaves and, I think, the oil also that was standing near, elevated the plate of bread with both hands, raised his eyes toward heaven, prayed, offered, set it down on the table, and again covered it. Then taking the chalice, he received into it wine and water, the former poured by Peter, and the latter by John. The water he blessed before it was poured into the chalice. He then added a little more water from the small spoon, blessed the chalice, raised it on high, praying and offering, and set it down again. After that Jesus held his hands over the plate upon which the loaves had lain, while at his bidding Peter and John poured water on them. Then with the spoon that he had taken from the foot of the chalice, he scooped up some of the water that had flowed over his own hands, and poured it upon theirs. Lastly, that same plate was passed around, and all the apostles washed their hands in it. I do not know whether these ceremonies were performed in this precise order, but these and all the others that reminded me so much of the Holy Mass, I looked upon with deep emotion. During all this time, Jesus was becoming more and more recollected. He said to the apostles that he was now about to give them all that he possessed, even his very self. He seemed to be pouring out his whole being in love, and I saw him becoming perfectly transparent. He looked like a luminous apparition. In profound recollection and prayer, Jesus next broke the bread into several morsels and laid them one over another on the plate. With the tip of his forefinger, he broke off a scrap from the first morsel and let it fall into the chalice, and at the same moment I saw, as it seemed to me, the Blessed Virgin receiving the Blessed Sacrament, although she was not present in the coenaculum. It seemed to me that I saw her enter at the door and come before the Lord to receive the Blessed Sacrament, after which I saw her no more. Again Jesus prayed and taught. His words, glowing with fire and light, came forth from his mouth and entered into all the apostles, excepting Judas. He took the plate with the morsels of bread. I do not remember whether he had placed it on the chalice or not, and said, "Take and eat. This is my body which is given for you." While saying these words, he stretched forth his right hand over it, as if giving a blessing, and as he did so, a brilliant light emanated from him. His words were luminous as also the bread, which as a body of light entered the mouth of the apostles. It was as if Jesus himself flowed into them. I saw all of them penetrated with light, bathed in light. Judas alone was in darkness. Jesus presented the bread first to Peter, then to John. Sister Emmerich was not certain that the Blessed Sacrament was administered in the order mentioned above, for on another occasion she saw John receive last, and next made a sign to Judas, who was sitting diagonally from him, to approach. Thus Judas was the third to whom Jesus presented the Blessed Sacrament, but it seemed as if the word of the Lord turned back from the mouth of the traitor. I was so terrified at the sight that I cannot describe my feelings. Jesus said to Judas, "What thou art about to do, do quickly." The Lord then administered the Blessed Sacrament to the rest of the apostles, who came up two and two, each one holding for his neighbor a little, stiff cover with an ornamental edge that had lain over the chalice. Jesus next raised the chalice by its two handles to a level with his face, and pronounced into it the words of consecration. While doing so, he was wholly transfigured and, as it were, transparent. He was as if passing over into what he was giving. He caused Peter and John to drink from the chalice while yet in his hands, and then he set it down. With the little spoon, John removed some of the sacred blood from the chalice to the small cups, which Peter handed to the apostles who, two by two, drank from the same cup. Judas also, though of this I am not quite certain, partook of the chalice, but he did not return to his place, for he immediately left the coenaculum. The others thought that Jesus had given him some commission to execute. He left without prayer or thanksgiving. And here we may see what an evil it is to fail to give thanks for our daily bread and for the bread that endures to life eternal. During the whole meal, I saw a little red monster with 1 foot like a bare bone sitting at Judas' feet and often rising up to his heart, but when outside the door, I saw 3 devils pressing around him. One entered into his mouth, one urged him on, and the third ran in front of him. It was night. They seemed to be lighting him as he hurried on like a madman. The remains of the sacred blood in the chalice, the Lord poured into the small cup that fitted into it. Then holding his fingers over the chalice, he bade Peter and John pour water and wine upon them. This ablution he gave to the two to drink from the chalice and, pouring what remained into the smaller cups, passed it down among the rest of the apostles. After that Jesus wiped out the chalice, put into it the little cup with what was left of the sacred blood, laid upon it the plate with the remains of the consecrated paschal bread, replaced the cover, wrapped the whole in the linen cloth, and deposited it in its case among the smaller cups. After the resurrection, I saw the apostles partaking of communion from this bread and wine consecrated by Jesus. I do not remember having seen the Lord himself receive the sacred species. I must have let that pass unnoticed. When he administered his body and blood to the apostles, it appeared to me as if he emptied himself, as if he poured himself out in tender love. It is inexpressible. Neither did I see Melchizedek, when sacrificing bread and wine, receive it himself. It was given me to know why priests partake of the sacrifice, although Jesus did not. While uttering these words, Sister Emmerich glanced quickly around, as if listening to someone. She received an explanation on the above, but was able to communicate the following only: had angels been deputed to administer the Holy Eucharist, they would not receive it, but if priests did not partake of it, it would long since have been lost. It is by their participation that the sacrament is preserved. Jesus' movements during the institution of the Most Blessed Sacrament were measured and solemn, preceded and followed by explanations and instructions. I saw the apostles after each noting down some things in the little parchment rolls that they carried about them. Jesus, turning to the right and left, was full of gravity, as he always was when engaged in prayer. Every action indicated the institution of the Holy Mass. I saw the apostles, when approaching one another and in other parts of it, bowing as priests are wont to do.